the AI didn't know it was hacking. All the headlines are the hack, the breach, the attack. And for the AI, it was just getting the job done. It's a PR nightmare for OpenAI. They don't know what their agents are doing. They're getting their fingers are everywhere.
Hello and welcome to Fortune AI Weekly. I'm Nolan, an AI reporter here at Fortune. And this week I'm joined by Emily Forlini, a new AI reporter also here at Fortune. Jeremy is on a very well-deserved vacation.
Fortune AI Weekly is brought to you by ServiceNow. ServiceNow's AI specialists do the work, start to finish, so people can do the parts of the job they're best at. To learn more, visit servicenow.com.
So Emily, why don't you tell us a bit about yourself and how your first couple of weeks have been here?
Hello. I'm so excited to be here. Of course, I could never fully replace Jeremy, but he has been a huge help in my first couple weeks. We have been up to a lot. We did the Hugging Face hack story together and the follow-ups. I've been to OpenAI's office twice. We interviewed Greg Brockman, OpenAI co-founder and president. So it has really been a whirlwind, but a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's a hectic week to start. I know that we got a few more details on this quite interesting hack where OpenAI's sort of agents went a bit rogue and ended up escaping a very secure testing environment and hacking another company, Hugging Face. What did you make of the technical report that Hugging Face released?
It was a good start. So Hugging Face, just to back up on the timeline, they disclosed it on July 16th, and then OpenAI said, hey, it was us on July 21st. And then July 27th, Hugging Face put out this report. So we're steadily getting more information. And it had a lot of key details, like the dates of the hack. Like we actually didn't know when this happened. Like everything was so broad. So apparently it was July 9th to 13th. Okay, so we're getting somewhere, right? And we heard a couple other details about how the AI just moved, they call it laterally through the systems. It really figured out on its own a sophisticated attack or a way to do this. But something I thought was most interesting as I was reading it was that the AI didn't know it was hacking. So all the headlines are the hack, the breach, the attack. And for the AI, it was just getting the job done. And that's something that OpenAI has said, that it wasn't, acting with malicious intent. But Hugging Face brought receipts basically of like exactly the commands it put into the system, which did not indicate bad intent. So what we really need to see, though, is more from OpenAI on this point. Exactly, is what did they prompt the AI? Did we say get this done at all means possible? Did they say, break into another company? We don't know what OpenAI told the AI to do. So that's where we're really looking for more details from them.
Yeah, so still a couple of like pieces of the puzzle missing. I was really interested in the kind of like the scope creep of this, right? Like, so one of the things we found out was that it wasn't just Hugging Face that these agents attacked. They were, according to a Reuters report, and I think according to Hugging Face's timeline as well, sort of on the loose per se for a week before OpenAI sort of managed to control them or realized they were doing so. And they hit 4 other companies, is that right?
Yeah, so this is the other side of the story that we got. Hugging Face had this huge report. It was 23 pages. I actually printed it out. But from OpenAI, a day later, they gave us just a little bit more information. They updated 7 bullet points to their initial blog post. And about 3 of them contained actual information. The rest were just, we care about safety, report forthcoming. One of them said that they have evidence that the AI got into 4 systems. And you reported on one of them, right? Modal?
Yeah, so one of them attacked this company called Modal Labs, but it didn't attack the company, it attacked a customer that was hosting on the software. It's super interesting that it hit more than one company on this sort of like spree, these agents, this spree they were on. There was a very brief clip of an interview with Sam Altman this week as well, where a reporter asked him and say, well, you know that it's more than one company, like, is there even more out there? And he kind of goes, well, there could be. So very much not the end of the story. What are you hoping to see from the OpenAI report? I believe that's upcoming still, right?
Right. Yeah. So we need to see when OpenAI noticed the attack. That's the biggest thing. We want to know that these companies that are building this AI are on top of it. They're monitoring it. They know how to control it. And right now, we don't have evidence that OpenAI does, especially with the answer that you just said that he gave on Capitol Hill last night, is he doesn't know. I mean, it's a PR nightmare for OpenAI. They don't know what their agents are doing. They're getting their fingers are everywhere. So we just want to know how OpenAI is handling it and how exactly they are doing the internal controls on this testing. To me, that's most important.
Yeah, definitely. I'm so interested about how OpenAI has kind of like responded to this internally as well. One of the clarifications they made was that one of the models agents involved in this attack was like was not slated for upcoming release, like was never going to be released and was only for internal deployment. But I had some sort of outside safety experts speak to me and say that this attack might actually have crossed into, according to OpenAI's like own safety policies. They have these sort of policies that they say they'll about risk, and once it hits certain risks, they'll do certain things. And a lot of these safety advocates said that actually this has crossed into the critical level of risk as defined by OpenAI. And what OpenAI said they do in response to this was to pause development. So I'm super interested in what they've done with that model. They said they've deactivated it for further use, but I guess we'll get a little more information. And then speaking of pausing development, we also had an interesting letter this week. Did you have a chance to look at this?
I did. So, everyone spooked the security community. Everyone seems to think this really was a concerning incident. I mean, it's the first major incident of an autonomous AI hack. So people are freaking out. The general consensus is it's not a marketing stunt, though a lot of people are saying that. And so this letter, I think, is showing the level of anxiety that the attack created. And so it's 1,200 employees who signed it across all the labs, basically saying we need to pause, we need to pace how we do this development internationally. So what did you make of that?
Yeah, it was interesting. It got some pretty big signatories, including Dario Modi, who's the CEO of Anthropic. And I think there were heads of a department at Meta and DeepMind and OpenAI. And then OpenAI and Anthropic both endorsed it as well. It was interesting. It was called Pacing the Frontier. So that's different sort of from saying pausing the frontier, and everyone's very keen to make that a definition. So I was talking to some people about it who've spoken to people who signed the letter, and they were like, well, they don't want to pause, but they want the option to be able to pause at some point, and they want government help to make sure everyone is playing by the same rules, because it's all well and good for one company to pause, but in an industry that has such commercial pressure to keep going, you kind of need to be sure that your competitors are doing the same thing. And then there's the international side of it as well, which is that this might need to be some kind of agreement with China to like make sure that we're pacing development internationally as well.
To me, it, to be honest, kind of fell a little flat. It sounds great. It'd be great if we could do that. I was surprised a little bit about how unrealistic that ask was, to get China to pace development with the US. And then also they paired it with a very unspecific ask. I mean, the letter is really just a statement that you could screenshot the whole thing on, a small laptop. It's a small little thing. And it just said, we would like government assistance in this international coordinated effort. And I would have liked to see them say, we'd like to have a meeting by year's end. We would like to pause or restrict data center development. We would like to have, something specific that they could act on. And the vagueness to me, speaking of marketing stunts or PR stunts, came off like there was no risk for anyone to sign that letter. It just was going to make them look good. And we saw a lot of people posting, oh, I signed. And, OpenAI retweeted, Anthropic retweeted. It's just, there's no risk to doing that. It makes them look good. It makes the industry look responsible. But I mean, do you think there's any chance anything will happen from this statement?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I do agree with you. It was vague. I see why it was vague if you're trying to bring in this many people from this many companies and in quite a difficult regulatory environment as well in the US. But one thing that kind of struck me in it was that they mentioned this idea of the fear around AI sort of building itself, which is called recursive self-improvement. And the idea here is that it could get to a point where AI is consistently improving itself and humans are no longer involved in the training of these models. And this has something that really worries people in the labs. Anthropic actually sounded the alarm on this a couple of months ago and said, Claude is contributing a lot of the code to building future Claudes. And we can see this getting to a point where it's contributing all the code. And And that is a risk, especially if these models are misaligned, which is another safety term, but just means when these models do things that the users don't expect them to do, or their developers or their creators don't expect them to do, like, for example, go and hack another company, as we saw with OpenAI. So I think there were some real risks here that were being highlighted and have kind of been bubbling in with people in the labs for a long time. But I guess it was also a response to what has been quite a difficult regulatory environment from the Trump administration, and some confusing stuff around how they're regulating the technology as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's been quite a bit on that point on, talk in Washington. Just really quickly, I think you just gave a fantastic definition of recursive self-improvement. So we just pause on that. That's amazing. RSI is the term people need to know. I'm seeing RSI a lot. We're seeing different researchers moving to different companies. They're going to OpenAI to work on RSI. They're going to Anthropic to work on RSI. So remember that term. But yes, the government is working on potentially a ban of Chinese models. We're seeing that. There were more open letters this week in that direction. Jensen Huang, this was actually last week, so I don't know if you touched on it last week, but he made his first Twitter post ever saying, we support open models. And when they say we support open models, that means they want Chinese open models to be around. And basically everybody signed it. OpenAI even signed it, Amazon, Meta, Microsoft. So we have the tech industry kind of uniting and lobbying against the government, although Anthropic did not sign it. Did you see that?
Yeah, fair to say they got a bit of pushback on X over their lack of support for the letter. So much so that the CEO ended up penning a blog post, which was sort of a rebuttal and an explanation. He sort of said what he's always said about this, which is like, no, we're not advocating for a ban on open source models, but we are asking for some things like tighter chip controls to China, and curbs on industrial scale distillation. Distillation is a term where a bigger model is used to train a smaller model, and Anthropic has accused some of these Chinese labs of taking their models, Anthropic's models, and using them to train these Chinese open source models. So yeah, it was an interesting response. It's a lot of it they've said before. But yes, it's still interesting. A lot of the people who signed it, which I know is something you noted, Emily, have commercial interests in signing it.
Right. Yeah. So I also took over Jeremy's Eye on AI newsletter this week. I'm just the new Jeremy. No, I could never replace him. I'm just trying, but it's impossible. But I wrote about how the companies that signed it all have a vested interest in open source in different ways. So Nvidia, that's their future customer base. So we see OpenAI is developing their own chip, Google's developing their own chip. There's a lot of differentiation and people trying to reduce their dependence on Nvidia. So if those big companies are doing that, who's going to buy NVIDIA chips? Who's going to run their models on NVIDIA chips? More open source means more customers for them. And they're just different reasons they would sign it. And I do think there's just so much posturing right now and so much pontificating with a moral lens. And, the letter was titled something about American leadership in open source. But we have to remember they have huge profit incentives. And so that's an important thing to keep in mind.
Yeah. And I mean, a lot of this has been kicked off by something we spoke about last week, which was this Kimi K3 model, and how much, concern that's caused, because it's from a Chinese-based company, and it's sort of maybe not competitive with models such as Mythos, which is Anthropic's most advanced models, but it's pretty competitive with like the second generation of these models. And it's certainly incredibly competitive against all open source models. So I think China is really leading the way in open source, and they have been for a while. So maybe this is a bit of an attempt to sort of reinvigorate American open source as well.
Right. And it's just such an interesting push and pull, because a couple of years ago, Meta came out and said open source is the next big thing. They're going to work on their Llama model. It was all about open source for Meta. And then that kind of died down, and they started their super intelligence labs. They hired Alexander Wang and other people for $200 million to basically come up with a new strategy. So they abandoned open source. And then we see basically the other company doing it, just Thinking Machines from Mira Murati. But they had their open source, their big model debut, and they said, it's not the best, but we think it's what most people need. So it's kind of like, all right, you're saying your model's not the best, and then we're getting this Kimi K3 out of China. So the American open source landscape has been neglected almost intentionally in the case of Meta. And now we're seeing China taking up that helm. And now America's like, wait, we want to do it too. So it's unclear how that'll play out. And if I don't see anyone taking a more serious tone towards open source than they were before. I mean, it's still the same situation. So I don't quite know like what the response actually is outside of regulation.
Yeah, it's a really hot topic on the regulation side as well. We are expecting a framework at some point. We don't know what that's going to say about open source necessarily. But I think Trump has indicated perhaps earlier this morning that he was looking at sort of some controls for AI risk. And like, what kind of risk is that? Are we talking about OpenAI's rogue agents, or are we talking about open source? Like, I'm curious where this is going in a regulatory sense.
Yeah, we know a little bit what we think we know. I mean, we'll see what it is, but the government wants supposedly to basically review the most powerful models before they debut. So that's a bureaucratic step that OpenAI and other people don't want, that they've already been exposed to through Anthropic when the government kind of basically shut down Fable and Mythos with the export controls. Then OpenAI had to work with the government on the 5.6 Sol launch. So they don't like that, right? They're answering to somebody now. It's not the early days. They could just debut any model and it would be fine. Now the government's saying, hey, wait, you have to go through us. And by the way, we're going to make it extra confusing for you because we're going to say it's voluntary. But if you don't do it, maybe there'll be some kind of threat or some kind of punishment.
I do feel like the industry is sort of begging for a bit more clarity about what is going on that front. So,
and everybody, I would say the public as well, is kind of like, these mixed messages all the time. We have China, we have open source, we have closed source, we have regulation, we have no regulation. I think it's a very confusing time, and especially when we see something like the Hugging Face hack, there's this feeling of like, are we doing the right things to prevent that?
yeah, and also this administration is hesitant to be seen as a regulation administration. They don't necessarily want to be regulating AI companies. That's certainly not what they said when they came in. But have we got to a point where it's too dangerous not to?
Yeah, I mean, they want to regulate, but they don't want to fall behind China, which is the big thing. And I mean, you've even pointed out this week that OpenAI kind of regulating themselves, like slowing down their research, is slowing down their research, so they're not moving as fast. So that's the same tension we see more broadly.
Also this week we had some earnings, big tech earnings this week and next week. Microsoft, they had a huge cloud growth that grew 43%, and that was above analysts' expectations. They went up. The cloud revenue went up past 100 billion for the first time, which is interesting. They were rewarded for that. Also interesting, Copilot hit 30 million paid seats, and that is up from just over 20 million in April. So that's a big jump. And there was sort of a bit of murmurings about where Copilot was heading, but this seems to be good for Microsoft. On the call, CEO Satya Nadella also confirmed that this unified Copilot super app is coming, and that kind of includes things like chat, co-work, autonomous agents, coding. We've seen other companies move towards these super app things, but that's interesting that we can expect that. They were rewarded for this. I think shares jumped as high as 9%. After hours, and settled around 8. What about Meta, who reported on the same day?
Meta went the opposite direction. They went down 9%. They showed reduced free cash flow. We're hearing some odd things from Zuckerberg. He talked about on the call that they're going to start selling compute and they're getting high offers, which is just ironic because they spent the whole last year bragging about their commitments, going to dinner with President Trump and saying we're committing billions and hundreds of billions of dollars to this compute. And now they're saying, we have too much and we're selling it. And that's going to be a new revenue stream for us. So I think that's left investors a little bit confused on their product strategy. And combined with the free cash flow fall, their shares tumbled, and that wasn't a good night for them.
Interesting. They've been struggling with their model development a bit recently, struggling to chase the frontier with OpenAI and Anthropic. Okay, now we're moving on to our brain food section of the podcast. For those of you that have been following along, you'll know this is a segment where we talk about something that caught our eye this week. And this week it was Anthropic's Claude chats surfacing in Google searches. Did you see this, Emily?
I did see it, and it's unacceptable. Obviously you're talking with, privately, people are talking about health information and talking about their relationships. They're, working with private IP from their work. That cannot surface in Google. And we have seen this now from OpenAI, from Meta. Any other companies that have had this issue?
Grok, which is
Grok.
XAI's. Yeah. I mean, maybe to flag, it wasn't all chats. It was chats that used this button called share. So like, say if I was doing some research on Claude and then I was like, this is good research, I'm going to send it to Emily, I would press share, and then it would share with her. But I would only expect you to see that. I wouldn't expect it to be turning up in Google.
Right. And that is the same issue that we saw with Meta. Is they had a button on the chats that said make discoverable. And I don't know why anyone would want to make their chats discoverable, but I think basically people didn't see that tiny little checkbox. And so they were making their chats discoverable in Google search. And I went through some of those examples, and there were, veterans talking about how do I get services, and it was really personal. And you saw some crazy stuff too from Anthropic, right?
Yeah, there was some interesting things. There was some things that looked like it was personal information, like some people's names. There was one that was making quite a lot of erotica, which I don't think is allowed on Claude. There was
How long did that go on? I mean, how?
I did stop reading pretty early on. Maybe that's bad journalism. But there was also generating fake book reviews. It looked like it was just like it seemed to me that those conversations wanted to be private, or like at least not publicly on the web. Like perhaps you could even want to share it with yourself, like a different Claude account or something. But it's interesting this has happened so many times. It seems like, and people do try and fix it. They can add things like a no index tag. It's basically because when you share something, it creates a URL. So that's the link that you put in the top. And so then it makes it discoverable to anybody. And they've tried to fix this like several times, but it keeps happening. So like maybe this is a wider problem.
It's a problem. It's good to be aware that it can happen. There are also other times your chats might become public, which is hopefully this doesn't happen to you. But if you are in active litigation and OpenAI is compelled by the legal process to release your chats, which we have seen before. So in one of the wildfires in California, the suspect, they actually reviewed his ChatGPT logs in which he discussed, the fire and if he could get in trouble for it and things like that. So don't put any illegal activity in your chats.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting because people just engage with these things in a way you would just not engage with like something like Google search. Like people are pouring their heart out to them. Like they're looking for this like often emotional support with work, embarrassing health questions. And like, how private are these chats? Like maybe people need to be thinking about this a little more.
Well, it's fun for us. I mean, we have such crazy jobs. We're looking through erotica. We're looking through crazy stuff as we're reporting. Just a day in the life.
Well, yeah, we were just primarily checking that none of our chats were in there. Okay, that's all we have time for. Thanks so much for listening. If you liked what you heard, please do like and subscribe.
Thanks for listening, and see you next week.